Hey guys, welcome back to the latest episode of the 1968 Corvair build. We're going to start this episode with making spacers for the wheels as we're trying to get the right balance of the wheelbase and stance of the vehicle in order to make a good looking model. And we're using aftermarket wheels and tires, so that's making it a little difficult, but I think I've got it figured out. And the first thing we're going to do is make our spacer using a cutting tool. You can get this at, I think I got this at Hobby Lobby. Basically, you just insert your aluminum rod or plastic rod into the cutting tool. You turn the dial to bring the blade down on the rod, and then you just spin it until it starts cutting through. And as soon as it starts to loosen up, you tighten the wheel again and continue to spin. Just spin freely, you know you've cut to the length you have dialed. And there we go. We've cut right through. And here we have our spacer. But we're not done yet. Now the spacer requires a little bit of work. We're going to have to open up the ends of the spacer, as if you notice, when you cut, the tool rounds off the edge. So what we're going to do is we're just going to open it up a little bit using our little grinding bit here. Using our handy little tamiya handy drill, which really is handy. And now we have our spacer. Now we just have to make sure they're both the same size, and we'll install them on the car. Okay, now that we have both our spacers, we're just going to do a trial fit by sliding them on the axle and then installing the axles into the car, just to make sure that everything fits right and to make sure that our wheelbase is equal on both the left and right, as we want to make sure the car doesn't have a tire that sticks out too much on one side than on the other. And as you can see here, we've got a really good spacing. It looks like the spacers are exactly correct, and now I think we're pretty much almost done with spacing out the tires on the front. This has been one of the trickiest parts of the build, as I want the model to have an attractive stance, which I think lends to a better looking model, but you also want it to be as realistic as possible. So I didn't want to have it slammed because Dave's car isn't dropped down as much as it sits at its stock height. Now this one's going to sit a little bit lower than his. It's going to have a little bit more of an aggressive stance, but it's just going to make for a good looking model, and it won't be that much different than stock and still maintain a really good look. And here you can see both spacers are in the car. You can see both wheels are sitting just inside of the rear of the front fenders and spaced very evenly. So at this point, I'm happy with the way the wheels are sitting in the car. And now comes the part where we have to design the axle carrier, where it's actually going to hold the axles into the car. Okay, now I'm designing the axle carrier. I'm using just an aluminum tube, which will sit in between the fender wells, and as the axles slide into the fender wells, or just slide into the aluminum tube. The first one I made was just a couple of millimeters too short, so I'm gonna have to make another one to make it fit snugly between the two fender wells, as I want it just to sit there so that the axles slide in and everything is held together like a friction fit. Now we're going to go through the same tube cutting procedure that we did earlier to make our axle carrier. Now let's see how it fits in the chassis. They have to make this just a wee bit smaller. Okay, now that we have our axle carrier in place, we are going to install our wheels and tires, starting with one side first, as we slide it into one end of the axle carrier. That way it'll hold it in place so that we can line up the other side. It's going to be a very tight fit, as I made sure that there was quite a bit of a friction fit between the axle carrier and the axle, so that I can press them in and the wheel will still spin freely. It's very similar to what Revell did on the Starsky and Hutch Ford Gran Torino, where they have the metal pins that slide into a plastic carrier. I have basically plastic pins that slide into a metal carrier. Now, once I install the pin into the axle into the carrier, I can just push it in and seat it using my tweezers. And here we go, we have the completed front end with both wheels and tires, and you can see the spacers installed into the axle carrier, and the front end is done. It was quite a bit of work figuring out how to get everything to sit perfectly straight, but I finally got it, and now I'm very happy. Now just have to get the rear tires correctly installed, but first I'm going to have to repaint them, as with all the test fitting and trial and error work, I've sort of worn off some of the paint on one of the rear wheels, so we're going to be doing a repaint of those, and then we'll be installing them. Alright guys, here it is, the 1968 Corvair with its newly corrected ride height, stance, and wheelbase. I think it looks way better than what I had previously, as you can see here, as I think the front end was just reaching for the skies. This, I think, looks a little more aggressive, has a little more of a performance-oriented view. I think Dave is going to like it. It's a little more aggressive than his car, but I think it suits the car perfectly, and I think he's really going to like it. I'm going to leave you with a couple of beauty shots. Enjoy the new stance, because I think it's a definite improvement. And I will see you on the next one.